Welcome once again. This is Pinnacle Professional College, and today we'll be continuing our lecture on Chapter 1, Strategy, Stakeholders, and Mission. Strategy, Stakeholders, and Mission. So we are following the ICA text, or if you are taking another professional course, the content is still the same for strategy. And so today we'll be looking at elements of strategic management and business analysis. Elements of strategic management and business analysis. In our previous lecture, we explained what strategic management is. We explained what business analysis is. When we talked about strategic management, I said that strategic management is basically two words combined, strategy and management. And if you understand these two words, you can successfully explain the concept. So strategic management is more about, putting in place plans and processes to achieve your long-term goals. Business analysis, on the other hand, is more about understanding the position of the company within the environment and then looking at the decisions the company will make and the choices the company will make, as well as their implementation plan, right? So we explained this in detail in our previous videos. If you haven't watched it, you can go watch it. So let's move on. Now we'll be talking about the elements of strategic management. But before that, let's look at some of the things we would cover today. We'll be looking at defining the elements of strategic management. We'll be defining strategic position. We'll be talking about strategic choices. And we'll be looking at strategy implementation, or what the text has called strategy into action. And then we'll be going on to discuss the scope of business analysis. Very, very important. So now let's move on. So what are the elements of strategic management? We all know that strategic management is a very, very broad concept. So we would want to understand what are the things that it comprises of. Now, it comprises of three things. Number one, position. Number two, choices. Number three, implementation. Three things: position, choices, implementation. That's what strategic management is all about. So you have strategic position, you have strategic choices, and you have strategy into action. So let's define each of them. Strategic position basically means you would want to understand the context of the organization or the position of the organization within its environmental context, right? Every organization exists within an environment. Again, organizations do not exist within a vacuum. That's one of the things you should know. Organizations do not exist within a vacuum. They always exist within a certain context, a certain framework. So when you're talking about strategic position, you are looking at an analysis or assessment of the strategic position of the entity. You are analyzing the strategic position of the entity, right? So, for example, you are trying to find out what's the position of this company within the market. What does it do better than its competitors? And what are the competitors doing better than them? All these things are stuff that relate to strategic position. So, for example, if you pick a company like Microsoft, you would want to understand what's its position in the market. Is it the market leader? What does it do better than its competitors, right? What kind of factors are in their business environment that affect this company, etc. So you are looking at the position of the company in relation to its environment. Very, very important. Very, very important. Now, what are some of the things that you need to consider when you're looking at the strategic position, right? As I already mentioned, you need to consider the environment. I've already mentioned that. So the environment is key when you're looking at the strategic position. The environment is key. The environment is key. So you have, that's one. Number two is the strategic capability of the entity, right? What are the capabilities of the entity? So number one is the environment. Number two is the capabilities of the entity, which would mean, when we say capability of the entity, what does the organization do very well? What does the organization do very well? Then you have expectations and purposes. Expectations and purposes, right? Expectations and purposes. That's also another thing when it comes to the strategic position, right? And what does this mean? Expectations and purposes. You know, in understanding the purpose of the position of an organization in relation to its environment, you are basically unraveling the purpose of the organization, right? And if you unravel the purpose, you would like to know the expectation of the organization. So, for example, if Microsoft, we are trying to analyze Microsoft's position, one of the key questions we're asking ourselves is, why are they there? Which is the purpose? Which is the purpose, right? So now let's delve into more detail in each of these points. The environment. Now, when we talk about the environment we are referring here is the external environment, right? Later we will delve into the model we call SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So that's what the SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, yeah. So this is very, very important. This is very, very important to understand SWOT analysis. But here we are specifically referring to the external environment. What SWOT analysis does is it looks at both the internal and external environment. So you have SW, strengths, weaknesses. Strengths and weaknesses focuses on the internal environment. Opportunities and threats focus on the external environment. So this is why this is the division, right? And then we'll talk about this more in detail. So here we are looking at threats and opportunities, which relates to the external environment. An analysis of the business environment involves an analysis of the threats and opportunities. So here you are looking at the threats and opportunities, which relates to what? The external environment. Very, very important. So what are threats? Threats are negative events, that could pose a huge resistance to the objectives of the entity. Anything that poses a resistance to the objectives of the entity is a threat. Opportunities, on the other hand, these are positive developments that, if grabbed, can improve the ability of the entity to achieve its objectives. So no need to memorize this, just understand the concept. Threats are bad, opportunities are good. And these exist in the external environment. As I discussed, environmental analysis will be discussed in detail in the future, and that's when you understand SWOT analysis and everything I'm talking about. So then the second point is strategic capability of the entity, right? First point, we talked about environment. The environment relates to opportunities and threats. However, strategic capability focuses on the internal environment, and it relates to strengths and weaknesses. Remember SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, right? The strategic capability focuses on the internal environment, what the organization itself can do, right? So when you're looking at strategic capability, you're looking at what the entity is good at doing and what the entity is bad at doing, right? So those are the strengths. The strengths is what is the entity competent at, and the weakness, what is the entity bad at doing, right? So this analysis of internal competencies and weaknesses is very, very important. Very, very important. Number three, we have expectations and purposes. expectations and purposes. An analysis of the strategic position also requires management to make decisions about the purpose of the entity and what it is trying to achieve, right? We can't talk about position without talking about purpose. Position and purpose, right? So how do organizations capture their purpose? They capture it through what we call a mission statement. A mission statement. So a mission statement is basically, a formal statement for the reason of the existence of the company or the purpose of the company. That's what a mission statement is all about, right? A company, for example, might consider its purpose to be to maximize shareholder wealth, right? That's, for instance, a purpose, right? So you have these purposes, right? And these purposes are linked to the expectations of the stakeholders, right? So the organization will have a purpose, but this purpose does not come out of thin air. This purpose is sometimes derived from the expectations of stakeholders. Very, very important. Very, very important. So let's move on to other things. You can read more about the expectations, right? The expectations of an entity. Now, we've talked about strategic position. We said that strategic position is basically a look into the position of the entity in the context of the environment, right? And it consists of three elements: the environment, the strategic capability, as well as the purpose of the organization. Now let's move on to strategic choice. And this is what we call the Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington model. Should have mentioned this earlier. The JSW model, this is what it's talking about, because the whole idea of strategic management is a very broad concept. So Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington thought that they would mention or break down the elements that comprise strategic management. So the second element is choice. Under strategic choices, the company is trying to identify possible strategies that the entity might adopt and make a choice of the preferred strategy. So under strategic choice, the entity is trying to look at what are the possible alternatives here? What are the possible alternatives? And then the entity would make a choice out of that. Very, very important. Right? So there are three aspects to identifying alternative strategies and making strategic choices. There are three aspects to it. Number one is corporate level strategy. Number two is business level strategy. And number three is development direction. So I'll explain all of this. Now, what are corporate level strategic choices? These are basically strategic choices that are made at the corporate level. In our previous lecture, we talked about this: corporate, business, and functional strategy. So strategic choices that are made at the corporate strategy level. That is corporate level strategic choices, right? In particular, decisions have to be made about what the entity should be doing, right? So these are corporate level strategic choices. So in essence, they are top level strategic choices. These are strategic choices that are done by the senior management level, right? And then it trickles down to the entire firm, right? Very, very important. Very, very important. One thing you should remember about corporate level strategic choices is it has an international aspect to it. So if, for example, a company wants to operate internationally, the question it will ask itself is what countries, what regions does it want to operate in? All of this comes under corporate level and international strategic choices. A typical example of a corporate level strategic choice is what kind of product we should be selling, what kind of market we should be in, etc. Now let's move on to business level strategies. Business level strategies. So choices must also be made at the business strategy level. For companies, a major strategic choice is between a strategy of cost leadership and a strategy of differentiation. We talked about this earlier, cost leadership and differentiation. This is where the company has to choose whether it will operate based on cost leadership or differentiation. So cost leadership is becoming basically the lowest cost producer. You produce stuff very, very efficiently at a low cost, and that is how you lead in the market. So for example, if you are going to buy milk, right? You are going to buy milk, there are different brands of milk, but there are some that are, quite cheap. And some of these companies try to produce milk at a very cheap rate in order to sell at a very low rate to attract customers. So that's basically cost leadership. Then differentiation is basically making yourself unique in the market. So you're not making yourself unique through low cost, but you're making yourself unique through basically a very, very unique set of features or attributes. A typical example would be, Apple. Apple is not cheap, but Apple comes with a certain swag, a certain prestige, a certain brand. If a company chooses a strategy of differentiation, it has to decide how it intends to make its products different from its competitors. So you see, very, very important. So under business level strategic choices, you're choosing between cost leadership and differentiation. Now let's move on to the third one, which is development directions and methods. A choice must be made about the direction in which the business should go. Now, what is the direction that the company wants to go? What's the direction? If a company's management decides on a strategy of growth and making the business bigger, decisions have to be made about how the company will grow, right? It's very, very important. And growth can be in two ways. Growth can be in two ways. You have internal growth, right, or organic growth. And then you have growth by acquisition. So these are questions. Where is the company going? And how does it intend to grow? If it intends to grow, of course, companies would intend to grow. Will it be organically or by acquisition? So when we say organically, or when we say organically, what we mean is that this is internal growth. This is growth from within the firm, right? From within the firm. So typical instance would be creating the right product within the firm and selling it in order to grow the firm. Everything here comes from within. Everything here comes from within. And then you have growth by acquisition. Growth by acquisition, which is basically acquiring companies in your field or in your line of business in order to grow. And there's also a third option, which I didn't mention, is growth by strategic alliances, right? Making partnerships with other companies within your line of business. So let me give a typical example of this, right? So if you look at football teams, there are football teams who grow by acquiring or buying other top football players from other teams, right? They do not necessarily groom players from their, they do not groom players from their under 20 or under 17 or under 12 teams, right? All they look out for is players who are doing well, top players, and they just buy them. That's growing by acquisition. By internal growth for a football club would be grooming the young talent so that they can get into the first team. Now that's a very, very simple example. That's very, very simple example. So when you talk about development direction, we're looking at what direction is the company trying to go. What direction is the company trying to go? Very, very important. Now, there are important things that I need to address here, right? Senior management must make strategic choices about its products and markets. One method of analysis, which is called ANSOF, the person who created this analysis is called ANSOF. It's called ANSOF, right? So ANSOF is saying that companies can grow in 4 ways. So when you hear development direction, we are looking at the direction of the company, the growth of the company. So ANSOF here is saying that companies can develop or grow in 4 ways. Number 1 is what we call market penetration. Number 2 is market development. Number 3 is product development. And number 4 is diversification. We'll talk about this in much detail in our coming lectures. But let's first of all look at market penetration. What is market penetration? Market penetration is basically selling more of your existing product as a company in your existing market. Now take note of the keywords here. Under market penetration, you are selling more of your existing products in the existing market. So here you have existing product, existing market. So a typical example would be the company. Let's say for instance, Pepsodent, right? Pepsodent sells to the entire Ghana country, right? So if they want to penetrate the market, they will sell more Pepsodent in Ghana. They won't go outside Ghana. They are just focusing on the markets in which they are operating and doing more in that market. So they have an existing product in an existing market. Now, when we talk about market development, there is a different twist. You have the company sells existing products to new markets. Existing products to new markets. So what does this mean? So going back to the Pepsodent example, what it means here is that Pepsodent would move from selling in Ghana to selling Pepsodent in, let's say, South Africa. So this is the same product Pepsodent, but now selling in a new market, which is South Africa. So under market development, you have existing products being sold to new markets. Now, so that's market development. Anytime you hear the word development in this context, it means new. So market development is essentially new markets. Now let's move on to product development. Product development, as you might have already seen, is a strategy that involves developing new products. Product development. Development means new. So new products. So developing a new product and selling it to the company's existing markets. All right, a new product for the existing market. So going back to the Pepsodent example, right? The company who creates Pepsodent, let's say Unilever, will create a new product, a new product different from Pepsodent and sell it in the existing market, which is Ghana. Right, so that's product development. Then you have diversification. Diversification is basically selling new products in new markets. New products in new markets. Again, as I mentioned, we would explain this in more detail as we go along. So you have market penetration, you have market development, you have product development, you have diversification. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, you can just ask your question in the comments section of this video and I'll answer it. The nature of strategic choices. What is the nature of strategic choices? Making a strategic choice is often a fairly simple decision in the sense that choices are quite clear. Choices are clear, right? So you have the choices in front of you. It's up to you to assess them and select the best or preferred option. Here are some of the choices that have to be made, right? What are some of the typical choices that companies have to go through, right? For a typical example would be, what are some of the decisions we need to take and should they be aligned with what's happening in the environment? That's a typical question. Another question that we'll be asking ourselves is, should we go with cost leadership strategy or differentiation strategy? You know, how can we manage the entity to get the best out of it? These are all choices. These are all choices, right? Now let's move on to strategy into action, or what I call implementation. This is the third element in the Johnson, Scholes, and Whittington framework, or the JSW model. This means strategy into action basically means implementing the chosen strategies. And there are three aspects to this. There are three aspects. It means organizing, it means enabling, and it means managing change. So let's explain each of them. When we say organizing, what do we mean? When we say organizing, when you are organizing, it's important to understand that what you are doing here is creating a structure that will help the entity implement its strategies. Organizing simply means creating a management structure that will help the organization achieve its strategic targets. So when you're organizing things in your house, you are basically putting them in order. So that's the structure. That's the structure. So you are creating what we call, a structure, which is very, very important. Now let's move on to enabling. Enabling simply means enabling the entity to achieve success through the use of resources. I'm sure you've heard the term enabling resources, because it's the resources that enable you to action out what you've chosen or to implement what you've chosen. If you don't have the resources to choose, the resources to do what you've chosen, then it becomes quite difficult. So enabling means the effective use of resources. Effective use of resources. Each of these resources must be used to support the achievement of strategic objectives. So when we talk about resources, there are different kinds of resources. Human beings are resources, or you can call them employees are resources. Information is a resource. Technology is a resource. All of these things help to contribute towards the achievement of goals or strategy. Then the last part is managing change. Anytime you make an implementation, know that it creates change, and this change has to be managed. This change has to be managed, because if it's not managed, people might become resistant to the change, and it might affect the successful implementation of the preferred choice. Very, very important. So 3 aspects to it: organizing, enabling, and managing change anytime you talk about implementation. Now, let's move on to the scope of business analysis. The scope of business analysis. What's the scope of business analysis? So we are discussing, when we talk about the scope, we are looking at the entirety of business analysis, right? So strategy is normally implemented through operational processes and through the coordination of different efforts of individuals. So one of the things you need to know when it comes to business analysis is work processes and relationships need to be managed efficiently so that the entity is able to achieve its strategic objectives. Like improvements in business processes are often a significant aspect of strategy implementation. Very, very important. Very, very important. So what we are basically talking about here is that for strategy to be implemented, we need to improve our business processes. We need to get the support of management information systems. And we need to ensure that all our new projects and investments align with what our strategy is saying. Very, very important. So let's move on to other things. We cannot talk about strategic management without talking about supporting business processes. That's what we were talking about earlier. Anytime you think about strategic management, you have to know that they are supporting operational processes that drive them, that drive the achievements of what we've set out in our strategy. So for example, if you have a long-term plan of becoming the market leader in 10 years, right? What do? You go to the drawing board and set processes that would help you to achieve that, right? That will help you to achieve that. Very, very important. So let's look at this simple chart. Under business analysis here, you have strategic position, strategic choices, and strategic action, which we've talked about. And then we have, under these three elements, we have the supporting business processes. The supporting business processes, which is business process change, IT, project management, and financial analysis. Undergirding all of this is people. You cannot take people out of this equation. People help you to drive your results. People are important. So you have business analysis at the top. You have the three elements in there that comprise it. And then you have these supporting business processes, which are, you can't leave out the financial side, which is financial analysis. You have the project management side, you have the IT side, and then you have the business process change side, as well as people. Very, very important. So we'll be talking about, I'll be briefly introducing organizational purpose and strategy. Organizational purpose and strategy. When we talk about organizational purpose and strategy, here we are looking at, we'll be talking about a few things, right? We'll be talking about a hierarchy of objectives. You're talking about a mission and vision, goals and objectives, etc. I'm sure as we are going through, you are getting an understanding of everything to do with strategy, stakeholders, and mission. But if you are confused at any point, please drop a comment and I'll respond to it. Now, let's look at a hierarchy of objectives and plans. A hierarchy of objectives and plans, right? So what you need to know is that the overall purpose of the organization is its mission. And then under this mission, it will have goals, which is the overall aims. You can call them aims. And then you have objectives, which are specific aims. And then you have strategies and strategic aims, right? Which are long-term targets. Then you have tactical plans, and then you have operational plans. So this is the hierarchy. Always please keep this hierarchy in mind. This is the hierarchy. You have mission, you have goals, you have objectives, you have strategies, you have tactical plans, and then you have operational plans. You have operational plans. Now, the acronym I use for this, which might be helpful for you, is let's go back to it. The acronym I use for this is MGO, STO, MGO, and this sort of rhymes, MGO. So you have mission, goals, objectives, strategies, tactical plans, operational plans. MGO. What's the mission? The mission is basically the overall purpose. It's at the top. The goals are the general aims. The objectives are the specific aims. The strategies are the long-term targets. The tactical plans are the implementation targets, as well as budgets. And the operational plans are basically action plans and targets. We've explained this as we've gone along in our conversation, but it's good to highlight or touch on these things. Now, what is a mission? Let's look at this in more detail. The mission, as we've already indicated, is the purpose of an organization and the reason for its existence, right? You would see that many organizations would have a formal statement concerning their mission. Why are they even operating? Why are they even operating? Very, very important. Very, very important. So, questions that will be asked when it comes to the mission or the mission statement, some of the things that it will try to cover is, what is our business? What kind of value are we offering? Basically, what are we aiming to achieve? Why are we operating? These are all questions that the mission will cover. So these are examples of mission statements. So for example, if you take the World Bank, the dream of the World Bank is to see a world that is free of poverty, to fight poverty with passion and professionalism for lasting results, to help poor people help themselves and their environment. So these are all examples of mission statements. You can read through all of this when you have some time. So this is where we would bring today's lecture to an end, and then we'll continue this discussion in another separate lecture. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, and please share this video with friends. Thank you. Bye-bye.